Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The house was filled with the sound of laughter, the kind of joyful chaos that only comes from a room full of children running in every direction, their voices overlapping in excited shouts as they tore through the brightly wrapped gifts stacked on the table. The smell of frosting and melted candles still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of the barbecue sizzling outside, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe that this day, this moment, could just be about my son, about celebrating him, about making him feel special in a way that he so rarely did. But then, as always, my mother's voice cut through the warmth like a cold wind, slicing through the moment with an ease that only comes from years of practice, from years of knowing exactly how to make me feel like I was standing on the outside looking in. I turned my head just in time to see her laughing, one hand resting on my brother Adam's arm as she gestured toward his kids, her voice carrying across the room without a single trace of hesitation, without a single ounce of awareness that what she was saying might be anything other than a simple, obvious truth. "Your brother's kids are clearly the favorites," she said, her tone light, almost playful, like it was just some harmless joke, like it wasn't the kind of statement that could shatter something fragile inside of me, something that had been cracking for years. For a second, the world seemed to narrow, the sounds of the party fading into the background as my pulse drummed steadily in my ears, my grip tightening around the plastic cup in my hand as I forced myself to process what she had just said, forced myself to decide how I was going to react. There were so many ways I could have handled it, so many options that had been drilled into me since childhood. Laugh it off, brush it aside, pretend it didn't bother me, pretend it wasn't true, pretend like I hadn't known it all along. But something inside me had shifted. I looked at my son, Jake, his bright eyes scanning the room as he clutched one of his new toys, his expression hesitant, his little fingers curling against the wrapping paper like he was waiting for permission to enjoy it. He was only 7 years old, but already he had learned what it meant to be second place. Already he had started to notice the way his grandmother's eyes lit up just a little bit brighter when she looked at Adam's children. The way she always found an excuse when it came to showing up for him, the way she always seemed to forget just how much he needed to feel important, too. I had spent my entire life swallowing my own disappointment, convincing myself that it didn't matter, that I was fine, that I didn't need the same kind of love or validation that my brother had always been handed so effortlessly. But now, looking at my son, seeing the way he was already starting to shrink himself down to fit into the space she had carved out for him, I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about him, about making sure that he never had to spend his life wondering why he wasn't enough for the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. So instead of forcing a laugh, instead of letting it go, instead of pretending like I hadn't just heard the most honest thing my mother had ever said, I took a slow breath, set my cup down on the table, and turned to face her with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Well," I said, keeping my voice light, keeping my tone even, keeping the storm inside me buried just beneath the surface, favorites can pay for their own college. The laughter around us stilled, the casual hum of conversation faltering as my words settled over the room like a thick, heavy blanket, wrapping around each person, suffocating the light-hearted atmosphere my mother had so carelessly assumed would last forever. I watched as her expression shifted, her mouth parting slightly as confusion flickered across her features, as though she couldn't quite process what I had just said, as though she had never once considered the possibility that I might push back, that I might actually fight for my place in this family. Adam's wife shifted uncomfortably beside him, reaching for her drink with fingers that trembled just slightly, and I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me, could feel the invisible boundaries I had just shattered by daring to say the one thing that had always been left unsaid. My mother blinked, her lips pressing together as she tilted her head, as if waiting for me to explain, waiting for me to backtrack, waiting for me to assure her that this was just a misunderstanding, that I hadn't meant what I said. But I did. And judging by the way her face paled, by the way her fingers curled around her wine glass, by the way she suddenly looked like she had been caught in the middle of something she couldn't control, she knew it. I reached into my purse, pulled out an envelope, and extended it toward her with the same polite smile I had worn for years, the same practiced expression that had allowed me to survive a lifetime of being treated like I was nothing more than an afterthought. "Go ahead," I said, my voice still calm, still measured, still steady in a way that only came from years of holding everything in. "Open it." For the first time in my life, I saw hesitation in her eyes, a flicker of something unfamiliar, something that almost looked like fear, like she knew this moment was about to change everything. Like she knew that whatever was inside that envelope wasn't something she was ready to face. She reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing against the edge of the paper as she glanced around the room, as if searching for support, as if hoping that someone, anyone, would step in and break the tension. Would step in and remind me that this wasn't how our family worked, that I wasn't allowed to stand up for myself, that I wasn't allowed to challenge the carefully constructed dynamic that had existed for as long as I could remember. But no one spoke. No one moved. Because for the first time, they were waiting to see what happened next. And the moment she opened that envelope, the moment she saw what was inside, I knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the room stretched long and uncomfortable, thick with an unease that settled over every single person standing within earshot, the weight of my words hanging between us like a loaded gun that had just been cocked. My mother blinked once, then twice, as if trying to process what I had just said, her carefully crafted mask of amusement slipping just slightly, revealing a flicker of something she had never once allowed herself to acknowledge in front of me: uncertainty. I didn't move, didn't shift my weight, didn't flinch under the dozens of eyes now trained on us, waiting, watching, holding their collective breath to see how this would play out, because they had never seen this dynamic shift before. Had never once seen me stand my ground so effortlessly, had never once considered the possibility that I might be the one holding the power for once. I took my time, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps, the envelope gripped firmly between my fingers, my expression calm, my movements precise, knowing that every second of hesitation was making her heart pound harder, was forcing her to realize that whatever this was, whatever I was about to do, it wasn't something she could laugh off, brush aside, or control with the same dismissive wave of her hand that had always worked in the past. I extended the envelope toward her, my grip steady, my smile polite but void of warmth, watching as she hesitated before reaching for it, her fingers brushing against the edge of the paper like she wasn't sure whether she should take it or let it fall to the ground between us. There was no demand in my eyes, no pleading for her to just see me, no desperate need for validation or approval. There was only quiet certainty, a deep, unwavering knowledge that whatever came next would change everything in ways she had never expected. Her hesitation didn't last long, because my mother was nothing if not predictable, and the need to maintain control, the need to stay one step ahead, the need to prove that she was still the one holding the reins, overpowered any lingering doubt she might have had about what she was about to find inside. With a small, breathy laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes, she finally took the envelope, shaking her head slightly like this was all some ridiculous game, like I was just putting on a show. Like I couldn't possibly have done something that would matter enough to shake the foundation she had spent decades building. But then, as she unfolded the paper inside, as her eyes scanned the words printed neatly across the page, I watched as every ounce of amusement drained from her face, her fingers trembling just slightly as she gripped the document tighter, as if holding onto it harder would somehow change the reality of what she was reading. Her mouth parted, her lips moving slightly like she wanted to say something, like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to call it a mistake, but no words came out, because for the first time in my entire life, my mother, the woman who always had a response for everything, was speechless. I didn't need to look at the paper to know what it said, didn't need to remind myself of the details, because I had spent too many years carrying this truth in silence, too many years knowing that my son had been robbed of something that had belonged to him, too many years telling myself that it wasn't worth the fight. But it had always been worth the fight. When my grandmother had passed away, she had left behind a college fund, a sum of money that had been explicitly intended to be divided equally among all of her grandchildren, a fund that was meant to ensure that every single one of them, no matter their last name, no matter their birth order, no matter which child they belonged to, would have an equal chance at building their future without the weight of financial burden. I had known about it when I was younger, had overheard whispered conversations about savings and trusts and ensuring the kids were taken care of, had been too naive to realize that those conversations had never actually included my child, that they had never actually included me, because my mother had made sure of it. She had taken that money, had funneled every last cent into accounts that belonged solely to Adam's children, had ensured that they would never have to struggle, that they would never have to wonder how they were going to afford an education, that they would never have to feel like they were starting from behind while my son, her own grandson, was left with nothing. And she had done it with the unwavering belief that I would never find out. Or, if I did, that I would never have the nerve to call her out on it. I took a step back, giving her space to absorb what she was reading, watching as she swallowed hard, her face pale, her fingers still gripping the paper as if she was trying to will it out of existence, as if she was silently begging for a way to undo what had already been done. "This isn't," she started, her voice weak, breaking slightly at the edges, but I lifted a hand, cutting her off before she could even begin to spin whatever excuse she had been scrambling to find. "You stole from my son," I said, my voice quiet but razor-sharp, each word sinking into the thick silence of the room like a blade. "You took something that wasn't yours to take, and you gave it away like he didn't even exist. Like I didn't even exist. And you thought I would never find out." The silence stretched again, heavier than before, suffocating in a way that made it impossible to ignore, and I could feel every set of eyes in the room locked onto us, could feel the collective realization settling over them like a thick, unrelenting fog. My brother, Adam, had gone rigid beside his wife, his face carefully blank, his jaw tight, his fingers curled into fists at his sides like he knew better than to say a word, like he knew that no amount of arguing would change the fact that this time, this moment, this fight was one he wasn't going to win. Because the proof was right there, right in her hands. And inside that envelope, inside that single sheet of paper, wasn't just evidence of the fund that had been stolen. It was something much, much worse. Something that would destroy the perfect, pristine illusion my mother had spent her entire life protecting. And judging by the way she swayed slightly on her feet, judging by the way her breath came short and sharp, she already knew exactly what it was. My mother's hands trembled as she stared down at the papers, her mouth opening slightly, then closing again, her expression shifting rapidly between disbelief and something closer to desperation, as though she were flipping through the pages of her mind, scrambling for the right excuse, the right explanation, the right way to spin this into something she could justify. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the years of rehearsed manipulation, the well-practiced guilt trips, the carefully crafted justifications that had worked so effortlessly in the past, unraveling before her as she realized, too late, that there was no version of this where she came out unscathed. The weight of what she had done hung between us like a thick, suffocating fog, wrapping around every person in the room, pressing against their chests, making it impossible to ignore the truth that had been hidden for so long. I could feel the shift happening, the slow, creeping realization sinking into the people who had always turned a blind eye, the family members who had known something was wrong but had chosen to pretend otherwise, the friends who had sat at this very table year after year and watched as I was pushed aside, dismissed, treated like my presence was an obligation rather than a priority. But now, with the truth laid bare in her trembling hands, with the weight of her betrayal printed in cold, undeniable ink, there was nowhere left for her to hide. This isn't what it looks like," she finally said, her voice thin and weak, her fingers gripping the edges of the paper so tightly that I half expected them to tear, her eyes darting up to meet mine with something that almost looked like pleading, as though she still believed, somehow, that I might give her a way out of this. "I didn't steal anything," she continued quickly, forcing a breathless little laugh that fell flat in the heavy silence. That money was meant to help the family. It wasn't about taking something from you. It was about making sure everyone had what they needed. Everyone. I let the words settle in the air between us, let the weight of it press down on her the way she had spent years pressing down on me, let her feel the slow, suffocating burn of being the one held accountable for once. Everyone? I repeated, tilting my head slightly, my voice quieter now, sharper, each syllable cutting through the thick tension like a blade. You mean Adam's family. You mean his kids. You mean the ones you decided were worth helping. She flinched, just slightly, but I caught it, and I knew in that moment that she felt it, that she understood, maybe for the first time, that this wasn't something she could just smooth over, wasn't something she could wrap in a warm, motherly tone and expect me to swallow. You don't understand. She tried again, her voice a little stronger now, her fingers curling tighter around the papers, like holding onto them harder would somehow change what they said, would somehow erase the truth that was staring back at her. Your brother, he always needed more than you did. He had more responsibility, more mouths to feed, more excuses. I interrupted, my patience snapping, my voice rising just slightly, not in anger, but in something colder, something sharper, something that made her breath hitch, something that made my father shift uncomfortably beside her, his face pale, his jaw tight, his fingers curled into fists against the table. You always needed to justify it, didn't you? You always needed to convince yourself that what you were doing was right, that it was fair, that it wasn't about choosing him over me, over my son, over the family you should have protected. Adam scoffed from across the room, the sound sharp and bitter, and when I turned to face him, his eyes were already burning with anger, his face twisted into something defensive, something resentful, something that told me he had been waiting for this moment, had been waiting for the opportunity to turn this around, to make me the villain in a story that had never been mine to begin with. You're really going to do this over money? He spat, shaking his head in disbelief, his voice thick with the same entitlement that had been handed to him his entire life, the same certainty that he would always be the one who mattered more, the one who deserved more, the one who would never have to fight for what was freely given. You're actually going to stand there and act like you were the one who was wronged, like you had it so hard, like mom and dad didn't do everything for you, too? Jesus, you sound pathetic. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, refusing to let the fire creeping up my spine pull me into the kind of argument he wanted, the kind that would shift the focus away from what actually mattered, the kind that would turn this into a fight instead of what it really was, the moment I finally told the truth. This isn't just about money, I said, my voice even, steady, measured. This is about every single time I was told I didn't matter. This is about every single year I spent watching you get everything while I was expected to be fine. This is about my son growing up knowing that no matter what he did, no matter how good he was, no matter how much I tried to protect him, his own grandmother had already decided that he wasn't worth the same love, the same support, the same damn opportunities you made sure your kids never had to question. Adam clenched his jaw, his arms crossing over his chest, his entire body language screaming anger, screaming humiliation, screaming defensiveness, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the tiny, splintering crack in the foundation of his certainty, the slow, creeping realization that this was bigger than money, that this was bigger than anything he could argue his way out of. And then, finally, I turned back to my mother, watching as she swallowed hard, watching as she felt the weight of it, watching as her fingers trembled against the paper she could no longer pretend wasn't real. For the first time in my life, she wasn't the one in control. For the first time in my life, she was afraid. The room had fallen into an eerie, suffocating silence, the kind that made every breath feel too loud, every shift of movement too obvious, every unspoken thought pressing down like an unbearable weight. My mother was still gripping the papers, her knuckles white, her shoulders trembling just slightly, her entire body radiating the kind of fear that comes only when a carefully constructed reality has been ripped apart in front of an audience that was never supposed to see behind the curtain. My brother stood rigid beside her, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscle twitched, his fingers curled into fists at his sides, his breathing sharp and uneven as if he was barely restraining the urge to explode. The entitlement, the anger, the absolute disbelief that I had dared to challenge them, to expose them, to take away the illusion that they had always been in control, it was all there. Written so clearly across his face that I almost laughed at the predictability of it. But I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything, didn't move, didn't so much as blink as I let the silence stretch, as I let them feel the weight of it. As I let them sit in the consequences of their own actions for once, instead of shoving them onto me like they had done for my entire life. It was my father who finally broke, his voice cutting through the heavy quiet like a dull blade, slow and careful, like he knew he was stepping into dangerous territory. Like he understood that whatever he said next might just be the thing that pushed this moment past the point of no return. Look, he started, his tone weary, his hand coming up to rub the back of his neck like he was already exhausted by the confrontation. Like this entire situation was nothing more than an inconvenience he had hoped would resolve itself without him having to be involved. "This isn't what you think it is," he continued, his voice carrying that same tired patience he had always used when trying to smooth things over. The same tone he had used when I was a child, when I was just starting to realize that in this family, there were rules for Adam and there were expectations for me. "We never meant to hurt you, sweetheart. We always knew you were strong enough to be on your own. Adam and his kids, they needed it more." Something inside me cracked. It wasn't the kind of break that comes with shock or pain or betrayal. I had already felt all of that, had already spent years carrying those emotions like an extra layer of skin, had already known on some level that this was how they saw me, that this was how they had always seen me. But hearing it spoken out loud, hearing it confirmed in a voice that was so casual, so certain, so utterly devoid of remorse, hearing my father say it like it was fact, like it was something I should just accept, that was what finally, irreversibly, shattered whatever remaining attachment I had left to them. I let the words sink in, let them settle, let them echo in my mind as I stared at the man who had raised me, the man who had watched as my mother played favorites, who had let it happen, who had made excuse after excuse for why it was okay, for why I didn't need what Adam was given, for why I should understand that I was different, that I didn't require the same love, the same support, the same basic acknowledgement of worth. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about stolen inheritance funds or favoritism or the way my mother had lavished attention on Adam's children while my son grew up learning to expect less. This was about a choice. A conscious choice they had made, again and again, to treat me like I mattered less. My mother made a soft noise beside him, something between a gasp and a whimper, like she had just realized how badly he had screwed up. Like she had just felt the final nail being driven into the coffin of whatever chance she thought she still had at making me back down. It wasn't personal. She blurted out suddenly, her voice high, rushed, panicked, her hands tightening around the papers as if she could somehow erase them, as if she could somehow undo this if she just explained it the right way. We just thought it was best. We thought you understood. We thought you thought wrong," I said, cutting her off with the kind of finality that made her flinch like I had struck her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words carried their own weight, carried years of exhaustion, of disappointment, of buried resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long, carried all of the moments I had been dismissed, had been ignored, had been treated like I should be grateful for the scraps they were willing to give me. I picked up my purse, sliding the strap over my shoulder with slow, deliberate movements, feeling the way the room shifted, feeling the way people were holding their breath, waiting, watching, unsure of what was supposed to happen next, unsure if they had just witnessed the unraveling of a family or the moment a long overdue truth had finally been spoken. Adam was still fuming beside my mother, his hands clenched into fists, his mouth pressed into a thin, furious line, his entire body vibrating with the kind of rage that comes only when someone who has always had the upper hand suddenly realizes that they don't anymore. My father looked weary, old, worn down by the weight of his own choices, by the realization that for the first time in his life, I wasn't going to understand. And my mother looked like she was seconds away from breaking apart, from collapsing under the pressure of realizing that she had finally pushed too hard, had finally taken too much, had finally backed me into a corner one too many times. I took a slow breath, turned toward the door, and with one last glance at the people who had spent their entire lives expecting me to just accept my place, I said the only thing left to say. "You thought wrong." And then I walked out, knowing, without a single doubt, that I would never be coming back. The air outside was crisp and cool, the kind of evening where the warmth of the day still lingered faintly in the breeze, but the promise of night was creeping in, bringing with it the weight of something new, something final. Something that settled deep into my bones in a way I hadn't expected. I took a slow breath, inhaling deeply, letting the quiet surround me, letting the noise from the party fade behind the closed door, letting the tension that had been coiled tight in my chest for years finally begin to unravel. The world felt different now, or maybe I was different. Maybe something had shifted so irrevocably inside of me that nothing could ever feel the same again. Maybe this moment, this exact second, was the first time in my life that I had ever truly, completely, undeniably let go. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, just feeling, just existing outside of them, outside of their expectations, outside of the version of myself they had spent years molding into someone who would always accept less. I had spent so much of my life waiting for their approval, bending over backward to prove that I was worth their time, their attention, their love, convincing myself that if I just worked harder, if I just tried a little more, if I just gave them enough of myself, then maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me, really see me, the way I had always wanted them to. But they never would. And that realization, as painful as it should have been, wasn't crushing at all. It was freeing. My phone buzzed in my hand, the sharp vibration cutting through the stillness, dragging me back into the moment, reminding me that I had left a storm behind me, that I had walked away from a fire they were still trying to put out, that my absence had shaken them in ways they weren't ready to admit. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was, didn't need to read the message to know exactly what it would say, didn't need to hear my mother's voice to imagine the panic laced into her words, the desperate attempt to pull me back in before I was too far gone. She wouldn't be apologizing. She wouldn't be taking responsibility. She wouldn't be acknowledging what had just happened in any real way. No, she would be doing what she had always done, rewriting history in real time, pretending that this wasn't a breaking point, pretending that I hadn't just exposed her in front of everyone, pretending that none of this changed anything. She would be telling me that I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic, that I was choosing to misunderstand her intentions, that this wasn't worth ruining a family over, that I was supposed to be the bigger person, that I was supposed to fix this the way I always had, the way I always would, the way she had trained me to. I glanced down at my phone, at the screen glowing in the dim light, at the preview of her message flashing across it, at the frantic, pleading words that I knew were carefully chosen to make me feel like the villain in my own story, to make me second-guess myself, to make me doubt what I knew to be true. "Let's talk about this. You don't have to do this. You're taking this too far. Family is family." The same words, the same script, the same desperate grasp at control she had always relied on, the same expectation that I would fold, that I would sigh, that I would give in, that I would fix it, that I would make it easier for them even if it meant sacrificing myself again. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't hers to manipulate anymore. I wasn't theirs to control anymore. I unlocked my phone, my fingers steady, my heartbeat calm, my mind clearer than it had ever been, and I typed out two simple words, two words that sealed this moment, two words that ended an entire lifetime of being less, two words that were the most powerful thing I had ever allowed myself to say. Not anymore. I hit send before I could overthink it, before I could let their voices creep into my head, before I could hesitate the way I always had, before I could let guilt settle where it didn't belong. And then, just as quickly, I turned off my phone, powered it down completely, silencing whatever came next, cutting off whatever last attempt she had to pull me back in, shutting out every manipulative plea, every excuse, every frantic justification. I wasn't available to them anymore. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't trapped anymore. I tilted my head back, looking up at the sky, at the deep stretch of blue overhead, at the stars barely visible through the city lights, at the vast, endless space that suddenly didn't feel so heavy anymore. The world was still the same, but for the first time, it felt like it actually belonged to me, like I had stepped into a version of my life that wasn't tangled up in their expectations, like I had finally claimed something I hadn't even realized was mine to take. And then, just as I took one last deep breath, just as I let the moment settle over me, just as I felt the last of the weight lift off my shoulders, my phone buzzed again. One last desperate attempt to pull me back in. One last reminder that they weren't ready to let go of me even if I was ready to let go of them. But this time, I didn't even bother looking. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to know what they had to say.